Okay. My name is Jerry Miner. I'm 46 years old. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, but I grew up in Flint, Michigan. My mother and father were divorced when I was about 1 or 2 years old, somewhere in between that time. And after that, my mother, she she went through a few religious organizations. It's really hard for me to remember because I was really young then, but she was involved in a few religious organizations, some that I can't remember exactly what they were, but she was heavily involved in trying to find something through religion that I do remember. She grew up in a very abusive household. Her mother died when she was 5 years old, and her siblings were subsequently split up between a bunch of family members. So she didn't really have a family per se to grow up with. And I think she was always seeking something like that. And after she got divorced from my father, I think she was seeking a group, to find some kind of acceptance, security. When I was around 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old, my mother came in contact with the Jehovah's Witnesses. A lady came to her door. We lived in the suburbs of Flint, Michigan. At the time, my mother was newly divorced, and she started going to the meetings, became really heavily involved really quickly. So that was around end of 1975, 1976. She became a full-fledged member in 1977. That's when she was baptized. So 1977 was around 10 years old. Was when my mother really accepted it. She came in contact when I was around 7, but she became a full-fledged. So at a certain time, I started to around age 19, 18. I started to have not necessarily doubts, but it became really depressed. Obviously, I didn't have a college education. I didn't have a lot of job prospects. And a lot of my friends were starting to have a lot. I had a friend that died after not receiving a blood transfusion. And I had a lot of other friends who were having just really a lot of emotional problems and were um, just having a hard time in a lot of different ways. Were succumbing to a lot of different things, drugs and violence, a lot of different things that I didn't expect and was told that I would not see, within this organization, especially with the young people. And so I was starting to become disillusioned, and I found a girlfriend. But in all of that, I was still going to the elders in my congregation and saying, "Hey, I'm having a problem. I don't know what my problem is." And finally, this was me approaching them and saying, "Hey, I've got a problem. I want help." Them saying, "Well, you need to be disfellowship for a while," and that was their formula for bringing me back into it somehow, getting me not disillusioned somehow.
So their solution when you went to
I remember when I was on 10. I became more aware of it when I found out how restrictive, I guess it was. There was some things that I couldn't do. So at 8 years old, 9 years old, I wanted to become a Cub Scout. And so I'd come to my mother and say, "Hey, I want to be a Cub Scout." She would go to the person that was studying with her, is the term that Jehovah's Witnesses use. That's when you're kind of mentored. So when things like that would come up, when I say, "Hey, Mom, I want to be in the Cub Scouts," I'd notice that she'd ask this lady who'd come to our house, and then I'd get an answer, which that we never had anything like that before, in our household. Then later on, I found out, well, God doesn't like you to be in the Cub Scouts. And at that age, I didn't really know why. All I knew was that I was being given an explanation that God didn't like the Cub Scouts. So that was when I first kind of got the difference that this was a different kind of organization thing that we ran. I was used to going to church. I'd gone to church with all of my relatives, my aunts and uncles, my dad. Even though they were divorced, I still had a good relationship with my dad. We lived in the same town. I'd see him on the weekends. And then as it goes on, it seemed like everything from school, what I was studying in school, even to where we lived, seemed to be kind of predicated on this organization that we had gotten involved in. And then I've started to also be taught. So I'm going to 5 meetings a week. Also, I have my mother. She was encouraged to study the publications with me. So I'm also being indoctrinated, so to speak, during that time. So my mother at least would take at least an hour a week to sit me down and go through publication. A lot of these publications that they have are based, for young people. So she would get a book that was for a young person, and she would sit down and try to study that with me. And then, as time goes on, she even went to my mother. Was a Uber Jehovah's Witness, so she took it to the farthest extent. I mean, she was teaching me the deepest things about that organization and their philosophy and their theology at a really early age. I mean, I think I knew a lot of things at 10 or 11 years old, and a lot of that was really disconcerting. A lot of it I did not want, and vocally, like, say, I don't want to know this. I'm not interested in knowing this. I don't want to know this stuff. And also deep prophecy, Bible prophecy things like that, of things that I just was not interested or didn't have the mental capacity to even be interested at that age. But my mother almost like forced that kind of stuff on me, to force me to learn it. I can actually say in my situation that the Jehovah's Witnesses may have made it a little bit better as far as the abusive situation in my family. I still consider my mother abusive. I got beat a lot. And those were usually for behavioral things, for lying or not doing the chores or whatever. But I can say that it was better after she became a Jehovah's Witness. She seemed to have a little bit of better handle on her her anger and outburst. But it definitely did not end it. It just made it a little bit different. Yes, they do encourage physical discipline, but they also encouraged more than that. And I will say this: there was an incident when I was growing up of a friend of mine who the child welfare services got called on, and I saw my mother's behavior actually change after that. But it wasn't like it was great. I mean, I still got beat. And I still think that the organization condoned that kind of thing. They definitely were. They definitely had the mantra, spare the rod, spoil the child. I mean, that was. I remember as a child in this incident that I'm talking about with a friend of mine, when the state was called in, as far as to see if she was being abused. I remember feeling like, well, I don't know why they're doing that to the parent. She's totally justified in beating her child because the Bible says that we can do that. I remember as a child feeling that way. I saw so many children that were, that got corporal punishment used against them, physical punishment used against them in the Kingdom Hall. And it's something that people don't talk about. And since there's just an overall okay with corporal punishment, I think that there was a real lack of really watching for children's well-being. And that, coupled along with just the fact that there was an organization that was kind of dictating the way my mother was raising me, so that meant, I didn't have any aspirations to go to college, because at that point the organization was encouraging children not to go to college. And so that influenced all the classes that I took in school, and even influenced my my overall motivation in school. What good was it to do any good when the world was going to come to an end, and I was encouraged not to go to college anyway? So all those things influenced me very heavily in my upbringing growing up. And I would say a lot of things negatively. I really wish that I had the advantage of being able to have the college prep courses before I did end up going to school much later on. I was lucky enough to have the influence of my father, who I kind of split off from because of religious reasons. I hadn't totally lost contact with him, but I definitely was pursuing a course that was totally along with the organization, and so I limited my contact with my own father. Around age 19, 18, I started to have not necessarily doubts, but it became really depressed. Obviously, I didn't have a college education. I didn't have a lot of job prospects. And a lot of my friends were starting to have I had a friend that died after not receiving a blood transfusion. And I had a lot of other friends who were having just really a lot of emotional problems and were um, just having a hard time in a lot of different ways. Were succumbing to a lot of different things, drugs and violence, a lot of different things that I didn't expect and was told that I would not see, within this organization, especially with the young people. And so I started to become disillusioned, and I found a girlfriend. But in all of that, I was still going to the elders in my congregation and saying, "Hey, I'm having a problem. I don't know what my problem is." Um, and finally, this was me approaching them and saying, "Hey, I've got a problem. I want help." Them saying, "Well, you need to be disfellowship for a while," and that was their formula for bringing me back into it somehow, getting me not disillusioned somehow. Well, certainly some of the policies haven't changed. I don't know if people are. I can't say whether people are following the policies, but obviously, the threat of not following their policies is of total disconnect and disfellowshipping. So that policy still stands. So as long as that kind of policy still stands, where I mean, I haven't talked to my mother, and I haven't had a meaningful conversation since I left the organization. That's more than 20 years ago, and I haven't had any kind of conversation with her in the last couple of years. And I think, and that's all because of this gap of this religion. She's told that you're not supposed to come in contact, and they're constantly told not to contact, not to talk to relatives that are disfellowshipped. Um, I feel like I was at a really young age when I was in it. I didn't really have a good idea of what the organization was, or what I was getting into when I got into it. Um, but even so, I still feel like it's a very unloving, unchristian thing to do, to divide families. And essentially, that's what's happening when you tell one family member not to talk to another family member because of religious reasons. The different things in my personality and the things that I want to say as an artist, I think, I mean, obviously are influenced by my background and the things that I've gone through and come through. I happen to meet a lot of people who have had a similar background to me. Um, I mean, for one thing, I became an actor and a comedian because um, I had to find a career very quickly because I felt like I was behind and I had to find out what I was doing. I mean, who knows what I would have become in a different situation, but um, it was something that I knew that I could do. I kind of figured I was funny because I knew I was funny in school, and it was really the only thing that I had. I didn't have a lot of background academically because that just wasn't encouraged. So something that I could do quickly is like I know I can make people laugh, so I got right up on stage right after I got this fellowship. Child friendly means, one of the main things is having a choice, giving a child a choice to what religion that they're going to become. I think that that's important. Every human being should have that. I think a lot of people would agree with that. It's something that wasn't given to me. I wasn't given the choice not to be a Jehovah's Witness. I think that might be disputed. They might say, no, you were given the choice, but I was given the choice along with losing my family, losing my support. So I don't really think that's a fair choice. Um, and to keep in mind, the children don't necessarily and shouldn't be making the commitments that adults are making. The adults have experience and everything on their side, the legality of being able to make a choice for their future, and children shouldn't be held to that at that age. They should be able to get all the facts and do the same thing that adults have and make their decision on their own on what religion that they're going to be. Obviously, I know that parents are going to have their children go to services with them. They're going to have them with them. I understand that, but I think that there's also some consideration to letting the child make his own choice, and I think it's important. So if that's done, I think that can help a lot. But also keeping in mind too that um, we are advancing as mankind goes on, and then we've discovered certain things, and we've discovered things about rearing children and corporal punishment, and I think that should have just as much a part of the discussion as the moral part, or the whatever text your religion may be adhering to. I think we should also keep in mind what we know. What we know is that the things that are beneficial for children. We should also keep that in mind, along with whatever the Bible says.